Welcome, everybody, to Trend Talks BizSec. This is episode 41. I'm your host, Jon Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence at Trend Micro. Joining me today again is Greg Young, VP of Cybersecurity at Trend. Greg, how are you today?
Hey, good. We're both back in the office, which is unusual.
Yeah, we've been on the road going to a couple of events. I think today's talk is going to be about some of those events, what we did, what the topics were, and how it affects things moving forward. So let's start with the one you were at last week. Why don't you give a little synopsis to the viewers here about what occurred?
Yeah, it was a by the CGA, which is the Gas Association, and it was the theme was energy security, which is interesting. A couple of things obviously is that energy is a target for baddies, as we've seen in the past with refineries and energy companies, but also it's an environment that has a lot of operational technology and OT stuff. So stuff that was dumb and now is suddenly smart, and the organization is not always has the culture of dealing with that. So recognizing those challenges. So and also some of these sovereign changes around world events and changing borders and changing flows of things. So it was very interesting. I was on a panel with the head of one of the intelligence agencies and one of the CISOs for one of the largest gas companies. So really good discussion, very frank stuff, and good exchange with the audience too.
Yeah, I mean, energy certainly is a critical infrastructure piece to every country out there, right? And the citizens have to have, especially this time of year. And we're kind of getting out of winter, but still in winter with cold weather. So you got to have heat to make sure you don't have any issues. And I'm curious, in your discussion with the intelligence guy, how much do they see, the foreign adversaries targeting the energy sector, and what kind of attacks are they seeing?
Yeah, definitely his theme was about foreign adversaries primarily for, state actors for, China, Russia. And it ranged from the, traditional attacks we've seen, from, all the accidental ransomware and the intentional attacks, but also, putting people in place through hiring as well was part of the discussion about, IT staff or other staff and having, adversaries hired in. That's a smaller part of it, a bit James Bondy, but it is real now, and it's happening more often because it's easier than trying to find vulnerabilities sometimes. So,
yeah, I mean, North Korea's taken that to another level, right? They've been doing that for about a little over a year or more now, and they're continuing to do that. Where they get their people into these organizations. I think a lot of work from home type of models, I think, in those situations, but certainly that could be a challenge. What's interesting to me, we don't see the destructive attacks, obviously, because that could be portrayed as some kind of a cyber war initiative. But obviously, the one area that I always find fascinating, I talk about it when I talk about the motives of the adversaries, is education. Educating yourself. So getting into these networks, getting into the OT networks, just to educate yourself on what you can do, right? So get into the network, do some things, figuring out some things, map some of the network capabilities. Where's your OT devices, et cetera, and then leave and wipe your tracks and maybe drop a back door or two into those facilities to be able to gain access at a future date, so that you can do whatever the next motive is in your campaign, right?
Yeah, drop a beacon, maybe not turn it on. The good interchange I had with the CISO was he said, I brought up the point about how important knowing your attack surface is in this, in this vertical. It's important to everybody, but for them, because of the types of devices they have, so important. And he echoed that. He also said, I talked about mergers and acquisitions, and that's very, very common in that vertical. So that was also a huge disruptor for them. So you nailed down your attack surface. You've got good procedures in place and playbooks, and suddenly, bam, you do a merger, and suddenly half your organization is different. So
yeah, this brings up an interesting point for a lot of the viewers, probably, especially if they're in this type of an industry, is how do you discover your attack surface? Because a lot of the devices that are used in those infrastructure and those networks, you can't have an agent sitting on those things that tells you I'm here and I'm working, right? So how do you deal with that kind of situation that to discover these devices that don't have an agent, but they still have an IP address and they're sitting on there, right? You got to do some form of a network scanner that detects these and then can identify what they are, how they work, et cetera, right?
Yeah, in a perfect world, your attack surface is, determined by a combination of things. One is, direct telemetry from endpoints, direct telemetry from your network, or indirect telemetry by inferring what's or deducing what's going on in these areas. The challenge in OT environments is they're often segmented from the general IT side. So you've got to actively go out and place, friendly devices there to be able to scan those. Otherwise, you're blind to them.
Yeah, but in most cases, they aren't totally isolated, right? There's some way to get from the traditional IT network into that OT network because everything's getting connected these days, right?
Yeah, in a perfect world, you use a diode and it'll be a one-way communication where you can just dump the info back. But there's very few organizations who are that disciplined today. So a lot of these really good practices are not happening in reality. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So what were you think the biggest challenges for the energy sector when you talked to that CISO? What did he tell you that was their biggest challenge?
for them, it was the disruption of business change. That notwithstanding all the cool technology they can have, it is it's disruption, whether it be price changes, merger acquisition, or other changes regulatory wise. And we agreed that regulations aren't the answer; that it was going to be standards.
Oh yeah, good point. Why would that be, you think?
Just so international now, so many of these businesses are cross border, and there was limited faith in the government to put meaningful kind of things. By the way, the other good takeaway we had was the discussion about public-private partnerships. In that, you start, number one is you start with a vertical kind of group, so all the gas companies get together and work together, and then the second one is you work cross-sector, so you work with the nuclear industry to say, hey, what are you seeing, or the telecos, what are you seeing, that kind of cross, and then finally is that the government, the public-private exchange of information. So if you get your vertical together and then your cross sector and then you work with the government, that's kind of the three sort of levels of maturity you can go through for public-private partnership.
Yeah, yeah, all good advice. I mean, that's kind of it's kind of interesting that you brought that up, Greg, because the event I was at last week, it was the Global Anti-Scam Summit put on by GASA. They have four of these events every year, and Trent's a part of them. And so, but what's interesting is when you're dealing with scams, right? You have this ecosystem, and similar to what you just said is what in the UK what they did to try to combat this is all of the financial institutions that have to deal with the credit cards and the banking routing and all that, they all got together and started to share the scammer information, TTPs and so forth, together amongst themselves. And now
Cool.
they're expanding to other industries and other groups that work in that same ecosystem. So with cybersecurity vendors, with other types of organizations that are out there to help that, because it is a public-private partnership is has to happen. And then the government was there as well to start talking about it. In fact, the Home Office of the UK sponsored the event and they had a couple of speakers in there saying that, we recognize this as scams as being a critical issue for our citizens. They're being scammed too much, and and it's causing both financial and mental and psychological issues for their citizens. And so it's going to require a lot of cooperation and collaboration among all the different organizations that are a part of it. So it's funny how it's the same type of model has to work in these different types of areas, whether it's critical infrastructure, whether it's scams, whether it's, the ransomware issues going on. It's amazing how that all kind of comes together.
Right, right. What was the biggest takeaway that you had there? What was the big sort of surprise or aha moment you had?
Just that the requirement to do a public-private partnership it's a lot of talk.
Yeah,
The action still isn't there. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that it's a lot of lip service, unfortunately, still, but there's not a lot of just, on the ground, get it done type of activity, because you're dealing with government, you're dealing with other types of industries and people inside those industries. So that's a little bit of a challenge, I think. And obviously the scammers take advantage of that. And they're just, the amount of scams that are happening out there is incredible. The other point that I saw that was just blew my mind is they mentioned the arrest rate of cyber criminals right now. On average, it's 0.05%.
Right.
So you have a 99.95% chance of not being arrested, not being go to jail, if you are a cyber criminal today. So the idea that we're going to let law enforcement fix this problem is not going to happen. So
Right.
you're going to have to figure out a different model.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The collaboration thing is difficult because in the worst case is that the government will use it as an opportunity to just showcase we're working with the private sector, but not really do anything, or use it for it's a pull but never a push. And getting that push out of government or getting that exchange is always difficult. And on the private sector side, so many, in the worst case will be companies use it for business development or government relations work. You get the wrong people there, not people who are, going to be actively contributing and not just looking to exploit it. So that it really comes down to the people. So I think on the government side, they have to be empowered, but on the private sector side, and the collaboration side, you got to pick people who are doers, not somebody with a quota.
Yeah, but I mean, the good thing from this, I spoke at the Anti-Scan Summit probably 4 or 5 years ago at The Hague, and when GASAS first started this event, and fast forward 5 years, 4 or 5 years now, and I will say that what's nice to see is the uptick in how many people are concerned about it. So it's a much bigger event. There's more organizations involved, which again can be a problem, but it also just is big, bringing more awareness. And what is good is that government is taking notice, and we're starting to see that, at least outside the U.S. The U.S. right now, we all made it very clear that for the next 4 years, we're probably going to see some challenges, just because the current administration doesn't want to do a lot of regulations. They actually want to cut regulations, where they were a lot of the recommendations were to do some more regulations, but that again, that's government speak in most places. But so we'll have to see how that goes. But I am excited to see how much this has taken off and grown over the years, and how many organizations, the same organizations, are there trying to fix the problem, and we're getting there, and it's happening. So like in the UK, for example, there's been a number of initiatives that the financial institutions have taken to prevent scams from happening on the financial side, right? So the payments and all that, they're doing things in those areas. So there's a lot more sharing of intelligence that they didn't have at the beginning. So, and that's actually making having an effect on this too. So it's good to see.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it takes at least 5 years for a public-private partnership to even just get its legs, just based on how difficult and the realities of the world are. The reality is also that the private sector has so much of the world's telemetry now and knowledge about the bad guys. It's not just a government thing anymore. It used to be that way, that the government had a kind of lock on the market about the baddies, but now the majority of information is coming through the private sector, just because we see it from having so many endpoints under management, or so many network segments under observation, and that's where that sharing is important.
Yeah, yeah. It's and I was talking to one of the law enforcement. It also has a lot of law enforcement this event, and I was asking them about the ability. So one of the really bad things about scammers right now, especially in Africa and another part in Southeast Asia, they're kidnapping people and forcing them to work their scams for them.
Right.
and slave labor, basically. And
Yeah.
I was asking about, do we think that with deep fake technology, would they be able to would that be able to limit the amount of slave trafficking that we have in this area? And it was an interesting conversation because in Southeast Asia, they are pretty sophisticated. They build data centers and they do that. And so the likelihood that the Southeast Asia gangs will adopt AI and do this is probably pretty high. Because again, if I'm trying to target a multitude of people out there, I may need people from different races, different colors, etc. And to be able to kidnap somebody in those specifics is very difficult, probably. Whereas I can use AI to create skin tone. I can use the same model to create and have different skin tones, different races, and just have it build it that way. But what was interesting when he mentioned that the Proud Boys in Africa, he's like, these people, they are not sophisticated. And he goes, he doesn't see any way that they're going to be implementing AI out of that area of the world anytime soon. So the human trafficking will probably continue in that area of the world, unfortunately. But there might be some hope in some other areas where AI is going to replace it.
Yeah. AI is expensive though, and they're making so much money now. Why change the model? It's they're making
Yeah, I mean, a
billions.
slave is
Billions
free,
a day.
right? You don't have to pay wages to a slave, right? Unfortunately, and that's the problem. So you're right. I mean, but again, if they can siphon off somebody else's AI resources and tap into something, who knows? They might be able to. Most of them don't like to spend money on that stuff as well, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. For anybody, looking to find out more about this, human trafficking, slave aspect of this, there's some good articles out there. There's a great piece done, I believe, it was New York Times. So this is real. Like thousands of people are
Yeah,
getting.
you don't think about it in cyber, right? It's like you don't think about human trafficking in cyber, but it's happening and it's unfortunate. And so it is an area that obviously we'd like to see law enforcement get more active in it, but unfortunately it's in that, in a lot of cases they're in these areas of the world where it's just difficult for law enforcement to have an impact. But who knows? Maybe we'll see some shifts moving forward.
Yeah, people from poverty signing up for a job to work in a call center, going to change their life. They find out it's not that, and the local gang leaders pay off the local authorities, to
Right.
leave them alone, and it's a vicious cycle that's unfortunately working.
Yeah. So in any case, maybe if we can get better at detecting these scams and not allowing it to be so profitable, which is what the whole conference was about, and what we're doing, like at Trend Micro with our Scam Check app, where you can just ask it if ask Siri if it's a scam, if you get a text. If we can prevent these things and make them not make as much money, maybe that'll help the situation. It should over time, but I don't know. It's such a prolific piece. I mean, last year the number was $1 trillion in losses and from scammers. So
Yeah, and the new one right now is toll scams. Because there's so many places that are.
I got one today in my text. It was crazy. So I did. I said, Siri, is this a scam? And it submitted it to our scam check backend, which is AI driven, and it came back and said in a couple of seconds, it came back and said, yeah, this is likely a scam and stuff. So hopefully, we're giving people some tools out there nowadays that can help them identify this stuff.
Cool.
Any
Great
any
discussion.
final thoughts on your event and any call outs that they had, best practices that they shared?
Well, one observation was the military, was present there as well, talking about their role in kind of the larger cyber war side. I think behind the scenes, retention is an issue for them. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see how they change their models for soldiers, trying to maybe beat them a little less or something for those key jobs. But otherwise, yeah, I know it's really interesting how things have changed now. The government, private sector. And the other thing that was always missing is post secondary. We just don't see them plugged into a lot of these initiatives or new things now. They're separate separate silo. I really wish, unlike other areas of business, we could, get that happening better, but that still seems elusive.
Yeah. Well, like I say, the future's bright, I think, but it's going to take some time to get where we need to go. So, Greg, great discussion today. Thanks for all your insights, and hopefully you and I hook up at an event here sometime so we can see each other face to face versus via the computer here. But everybody, thanks for joining us on episode 41 of Trend Talks BizSec. Greg and I will be back in a couple of weeks to talk about another topic. Feel free to give us a like or give us a comment on any topics you want us to discuss in the future. We'd love to do that. Greg, have a great day, great weekend. We'll talk soon.
Great talking to you, John, and watch out for the tool scams. So.
Exactly. Take care, everybody. Stay safe online out there.